Have you ever burned your hand on the handle of a cast iron frying pan because it's too hot to hold on to? Today we're going to solve that problem by making a very simple leather pan handle cover to keep your hands safe while you're cooking dinner for your family. I'm Jeff and you're watching Home Built Workshop. It's cool, right? Cooking with a cast iron pan can be great. They hold the heat really well and cook really evenly. But this isn't a show about cooking with cast iron pans. One of the downsides of cast iron is that, well, it's really just cast iron. And there's no sort of ergonomics nor insulation material on the handle. And during extended cooking sessions, this handle can get really hot. There's nothing to insulate your hand from the metal. Now, one thing that probably most of us do is just grab a pot holder or maybe a heavy glove and wrap it around the handle. But I thought it'd be kind of cool and a fun little project if we made a nice little leather cover that can slip over the handle and help insulate our hands from the heat of our cast iron. Sound like a plan? Let's do it. To make my little handle cover, I'm going to use this scrap of about 7-ounce leather. It's probably heavier than it really needs to be. You could probably use a 4 to 5-ounce leather and be okay, but use whatever you have on hand, and I've got this little piece, so that's what we're going to use. Our first step is going to be to determine the size we need to cut our pieces of leather. One thing to watch out for, especially on this particular pan, your pan could be different, but pay attention to the shape of the handle. Now on this pan, it's wider up here at the end of the handle than it is down toward the actual pan. If we make it to fit the actual size of the handle, the actual shape, then it's going to be narrower down here and it'll never slip on this wider portion. So we really need to make this to fit the upper portion of the handle, not necessarily the narrower portion. Really what I'm trying to say is if you just trace out the handle and use that as your pattern, you're most likely not going to be able to slip the cover over the handle. Keep that in mind. Now there's a couple different ways you could go about determining how wide you need to make your pattern. I guess the first way would be to use like a set of calipers and measure the width and measure the thickness and try to calculate all of that. But I like to try to do that a little bit simpler. I'm going to use a couple scraps of the same leather. I'm going to put it at the widest portion of the handle. To help me out here, I'm just going to use a little spring clamp. Then I'm going to try to squeeze this as tight as I can. I'm going to make a mark with a nice sharp pencil where the two pieces of leather come together. That's going to give us a rough measurement of where we're going to base the rest of our pattern off of. Now, if you were making something like a knife sheath or some other case where you wanted the item to have a nice friction fit, you could use this pencil mark as your stitch line. And most of the time, once you wet your leather and fit the item to it, this is going to give you a nice snug fit. But we don't want a snug fit on this. We want this to slide easily on and off. So in order to do that, I'm going to use this base measurement and I'm going to add a generous 1/4 inch to either side. That's where our stitch line is going to be. Then once we fit it to the handle, it should slide on and off really nice. So if I take my base measurement of 1 7/8 inches and I add a 1/2 inch, that's the spacing that I want to use for my stitch line. Then I'm going to add another 1/8 inch on either side so that I can trim the leather to size. But my stitch line is going to be at 2 3/8. So now I've laid out my measurements on my scrap of leather, and here I'm cutting them to size. My final width ended up being 2 5/8 inches. That's to account for the stitch line plus an 1/8 inch past the stitch line. There we go. Glue it together and done. Not really. Here I'm using my dividers to mark the same contour as the handle onto my leather. I want this to roughly fit the same shape of the handle. Now using a sharp knife, I can roughly trim away the excess. Before we glue these together though, I want to mention that if you wanted to do any sort of tooling, maybe you want to put a basket stamp or do some sort of floral tooling on there, now would be the time to do that before we glue these pieces together. For this project, I am not going to do any tooling, although I really want to try doing some like simpler basket stamping and stuff like that. I just got to get a few of the stamping tools first. But for this project, I'm not going to do anything, but just keep in mind, if you want to do that, now's the time. I'm going to use just regular contact cement to glue these pieces together. I'll apply a good amount around my 1/8 inch stitch line, wait for it to tack up, then I can stick the pieces together. By tapping down the seam with a hammer, it helps that glue really bond together. It's just a way to help get a better glue joint. Now using whatever sander you have available, you can finish sand all of the edges, make sure everything's nice and flush. I like to use my belt grinder because it works great, but really any sander will do. You can even do it by hand. Now that the edges are nice and flush, I can set my dividers to 1/8 of an inch and scribe a light line around the outside edge. This is our actual stitch line. Now I'll grab my stitching punches and I can punch in all the holes for the stitching. Ready for stitching. Oh, what thread do we want? Brown, tan, black. There it is. Red. What? You didn't think I was going to use a different color, did you? The poor pony has been neglected. We're going to change that. You're going to be okay. We're going to brush the dust off you. I'm going to use my trusty stitching pony, even though he's been neglected for a little while, to hold this piece while I stitch it up. While this is absolutely not necessary, you can totally do this just using your hands, kind of holding it, but this does make it a little bit easier. Kind of frees your hands up. I have a whole video about making this stitching pony. If you want to make one yourself, I'll put a link down below in the description. I'm using a saddle stitch and some waxed thread to stitch this piece together. For some reason I'm having a lot of trouble getting these needles through there. Same needles that I always use, but for some reason they're pulling through really hard this time. Yeah, it's okay. Thankfully, we don't have a whole lot of stitching to do. After tying off the ends and cutting them flush, I always take a lighter and melt the ends. This helps just kind of burn them together and helps keep them from fraying. Don't forget to tap down your stitch lines when you're done. And now for what I feel is, for some reason, one of the most enjoyable parts. I'm going to use an edge beveling tool to bevel the edges of the leather. I don't know what it is about this process. Maybe it's the little thin shavings that come off there or the sound that it makes, but I really like this part and kind of wish that there was 10 times more edges to bevel. Now I want to get the edges burnished down, kind of seals them up a little bit, puts a nice little shine on there. To do that, I'm just going to use some water and just dab it on with my fingers. And then I'll use a burnisher mounted in my drill press to burnish the edges. In case you're curious about this burnisher, this is a Cocobolo burnisher that I got from Pro Edge Burnishers. I don't have any relationship with Pro Edge Burnishers. I bought this item myself, but if you want to check them out, there's a link in the description. And you can see how it burnishes the edge down, kind of shines it up real nice, just makes it look nice and clean and smooth, and seals it up. Well, we are just about done with our leather pan handle pot holder thing. Technical term. Now we just need to get it fit to the handle of the pan. That way we can slip it on and off easily. I want to see how it fits first before we use any water to soften the leather. So I'm going to try to squeeze this open and see if it'll slip on. It actually fits really well. I want this to be loose enough that I can slip it onto the pan without the pan moving. Because, well, if we're cooking on the stove, I don't want to have to grab a hot pan just so I can slip the handle on there. I think it's just about there, really. I think I will soak this for just a minute in some warm water. Well, not a minute, but really just a couple seconds. I don't want the leather to get really soft, but I want it to kind of stretch just a little bit. Keep in mind, if you're doing this is cast iron. Any moisture you get on there could cause rust, so treat your pan carefully.
With the damp leather in place, now I'm just going to work it back and forth a little bit on the handle. This will help the leather stretch in the areas where it needs to ensure that I have a good fit.
That feels pretty good. Kind of wants to slide the pan just a little bit. But I think once there's food in there, I think it'll be all right. I'm just gonna leave this on here for a little while, let that leather dry out just a little bit. Remember, moisture on your cast iron pan, not good to leave it. I don't intend to leave this for a long period of time, and I will make sure it's good and dry once I'm done. After letting this leather dry for a couple of hours, now our cover slips on and off really easy. It's going to be really simple to slip this on there if you're cooking and you need to grab the handle for some reason. It's kind of taking on the shape real nice. It's actually pretty solid. Now we just need to protect it a little bit by applying a coat of oil. I'm going to use an oil that I would have never really considered for leather work. It's just regular cooking olive oil. This is a tip that I picked up from Don Gonzalez. He's got a YouTube channel. I'll put a link down below in the description. Very talented leather craftsman. Has some really awesome videos and a lot of helpful tips too. Regular olive oil. Who knew? And it'll be really easy, since this will be kept in the kitchen, to re-oil it whenever necessary, because we're cooking olive oil, kitchen, you get it. And that's going to wrap up this little project for today. Very simple and fun, but very useful leather project you can make in no time. Protect your hands from the heat of cooking on cast iron. Hope you guys found this helpful. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Get out there in your shops. Make something out of leather. We'll see you next time.